in our countries protesting, as in Seattle, but also governments in the third world not liking it and using the process set up, which is basically decision by consensus, to prevent a consensus forming behind what the US and Europe want. So in that sense, there's been a quite significant change. And if you think, I mean, there's so many areas where you can think of vast changes happening as a result of citizen activity. Think of the movement to deal with AIDS in South Africa, for instance, where there are huge cultural factors which make it very hard for governments to do anything because there's huge denial. But there artists have been involved. Mandela himself put on a T-shirt on the back of which it said, "I am HIV positive." Not that he was, but to make a statement that it was all right to talk about AIDS. And that kind of thing can have a transformative impact on people's thinking. And the AIDS movement the movement in the States have used artists, they use tactics of demonstrations of one kind or another. There was a silly example in the fight in this city against the Spadina Expressway in 1969, 1970. A colleague, a sociologist now called Alan Powell, with Jane Jacobs, organized a wagon ride. They had horse and buggy, a wagon ride down Spadina, which was the route for the Spadina Expressway to come. And the idea was that traffic on the Spadina Expressway would probably go as fast as that wagon, because expressways attract traffic, and with the Don Valley parking lot, or what's it called, the Don Valley Parkway, that kind of consciousness raising led to the Spadina Expressway being stopped at Lawrence Avenue, or is it Eglinton? Eglinton, sorry.
Yeah. I was just going to say that just to connect a couple of dots that Stephen didn't connect, the massive protests and numbers of people in Seattle and in subsequent meetings was part of what emboldened the governments of the global South to take to assert their muscles or stretch their muscles and take the positions they did. It didn't happen in a vacuum. So you're right that in a certain way, when you shut down the one thing, it just moves somewhere else. But it has the potential to affect how it is reconstituted elsewhere. The other thing I was going to say is there's also, of course, always this tension you have to be very vigilant about in terms of whether these incremental moves to open these kind of processes to more participation are really just a form of co-optation, or if they genuinely change the game. There is often a lot of co-optation going on, and what they want is to get the people into the room so that they can be demobilized. But that said, there's still all the possibilities that Stephen mentioned.
Just a quick question. I was wondering, you mentioned the example of Indian farmers successfully having a great impact at the WTO, and the third world in generally now being on side against maybe many of global treaties of some sorts. And I was wondering, might India or emerging global superpowers may be an ally in our own democratic country that we should look to them to ally with against our own governments? Or not so much against, but for, I guess, not standing against something, but for greater democracy and looking at allies in the third world? Just throwing it.
Well, I put it in terms of Indians rather than the Indian government. And Stepan already mentioned the World Social Forum. How many of you have not heard of the World Social Forum? Now, this is something, it's a huge phenomenon, and I don't think the Globe and Mail has ever mentioned it. But 50,000 people met in this town, Porto Alegre, in Brazil, in, what was it, 2001 when it started?
2002 maybe?
2002. And it's, every year it's happened in some way or other, sometimes once in Mumbai, Bombay in India. These are, actually I've lost the thread, there's a huge, what was it?
Allying with
allying,
Indians.
yeah. Well, they're major Indian activists who are, I mean, Maud Barlow is in touch with people in Mexico. We have I mean, the anti this kind of trade agreement. There are certainly allies in Mexico, and it is happening when citizens groups go global, like Greenpeace has branches all over the world, Médecins Sans Frontières. So the alliances, I think, are happening because activists are in touch with each other. Of course, by email, they don't even need to travel. So there's a lot of this happening. The actual government, I don't think well, governments interact with citizens groups in other countries. For instance, Lloyd Axworthy, when he was Minister of Foreign Affairs and was leading the world effort to achieve an international criminal court, and then a treaty to ban the use of anti-personnel landmines, he, as a grassroots politician from Winnipeg, went global in the sense that he was involved with citizens groups in other countries, I mean, in some sense violating their sovereignty, but generating an international mix of governments and NGOs working towards the same goal. So there is citizen government alliance going on, not just citizens of one country allying with governments in another. So it certainly happens.
I'm wondering, maybe we could look at setting up a CAP chapter in India. Good ally.
Sure. There's one more question here. Yeah.
One more question.
Hi. My question, well, I mean, we're talking about India now. You mentioned earlier the asbestos case with regard to Canada exports into France. I just wanted to kind of bring it back to that, asbestos being exported from Canada to India. My question is with regards to the onus of responsibility for safety regulations. Where does that lie? Is it with us exporting a known toxic carcinogenic substance, or is it with the country who's receiving it, who's having it imported? You mentioned the intergovernment regulations. Is it both countries coming together? Why do we not send inspectors to teach people how to use it properly? And with regard to citizen participation, you led us to believe that we do have a voice, and yet when Canadians hear protest the Canadian government for this toxic export, they are told, well, we have a right to do that. It's mere economics, you know, look at the bottom line, we can do whatever we want.
It's hard to give any kind of definitive answer to where the responsibility lies. You know, it's complicated. It depends what kind of responsibility do you mean, and responsibility in judicial courts, responsibility in the court of public opinion, responsibility under international law. I would hardly even know where to begin to answer the question. There are different kinds of responsibilities, legal or moral responsibilities, on different actors in sort of different geographical and institutional contexts when it comes to the chrysotile asbestos. One of the things that you hear in relation to the chrysotile asbestos, especially the exports to India,